Alright, welcome to a sped up version of a Stampscapes live broadcast from yesterday. In this scene, we're going to be putting together a tropical setting based around a surfer. Alright, what I'm doing here is, this is almost a half-page piece of glossy cardstock, and I'm applying a warm, very light base layer coating of ink, and that's just something that I call, maybe the first one or two colors that I'll use on a scene. In this case, I'm applying most of the colors that I'll be using, most of the inks that I'll be using before I stamp the imagery. You can do it both ways, but sometimes when you stamp the imagery on glossy cardstock, by the time you apply all of the inks over the top of it, sometimes you can lose some of the value, the darkness of those impressions. Okay, now there are some types of inks that you won't lose any, but with this type of application and just the sheer amount of ink that I was planning to use on this, I figured I'll apply a lot of the inks before I stamp the imagery, and then once I get things set, I'll work around the imagery based on the positioning of them, where the shadows will be, etc. So you can do it both ways with most types of imagery. In this case, it didn't matter whether you laid down the inks beforehand or afterwards, because they're largely silhouette in nature. I do have to work around some of the waves that I'll be using on here, so but that'll come later. Okay, so one of the things that I'm doing is I'm applying the inks, but I'm also retaining some lighter areas, and those are the areas that will represent either the light source or reflective light within the scene. I don't have like a formal light source like a moon or something like that in this scene, but I was working around the idea of a quote that I'm going to be using on the back side of this card, which is about stars. So I did want to have a pretty large area up in the sky relative to the position of the horizon line that will be created by the use of the seaside cove. So that's basically all I was thinking about within this composition. In terms of kind of where I was applying kind of some of the darker areas of this pre-inking area. All right, now one of the things that was kind of strange when I was doing this was the ink felt a little bit different going onto this paper than what I'm used to. I don't know why this was, but I don't know. It was glossy cardstock, but it almost felt like I was applying it onto the semi-gloss, kind of more of a satin finish, but I don't know. So that being said, the ink seemed like it was drying faster, so I used a lot of the re-inker fluid. And when I started applying my different inks on there, sometimes it felt like the moisture of all the inks that I had already applied was already dry. So what I did was I went back to my re-inker fluid, my lighter one, and I just applied another coating of that very light ink onto the surface again, just to kind of re-moisten both the surface and some of the pulp of the paper. And that's one of those things that makes it easy to apply your inks in a very graceful manner. When you're applying kind of a moist ink onto a semi-moist surface, it's going to naturally glide much easier than applying it onto a very dry surface. Okay, even if it's glossy, it'll slide much easier if you have a little bit of a coating of some of your lighter inks. I mean, it doesn't have to be a lighter ink, but just some ink that's already been applied. It's just easy to do it with the lighter inks, because it doesn't influence the lighting scheme within your scene so much. Okay, so I always recommend your base coats be kind of a very light value, something like a 10% and below is recommended. Now, there's different exceptions to that. Sometimes, like in one of my classes, we just go in straight with black ink, and we achieve all the grayscale tones using black, by using a smaller amount of it. But in this kind of layered dye-based ink style of applications, you really want to get a good coating down. All right, so I was just showing some people, examples of, I don't know, some kind of a, I don't know, Creature of the Black Lagoon came up for some reason. Every time I show that stamp, everyone wants it. It's a discontinued one by Ken Brown Stamps from the 80s. It's going back quite a ways. Okay, so I'm going to stamp out I figured it was time I stamp out my little imagery. I'm wiping off an area down at the base of this stamp where I'm going to position the surfer within the scene, okay? So I wiped off some of that ink so that it leaves kind of a spotlit area. And see that area right down below? It looks weird, but that's where I'm going to stamp my surfer. And if I have all of those textures going right in back of them, then the silhouette of that surfer shape won't stand out as much, okay? All right, now that I have that Seaside Cove positioned, I can do things like what I'm doing now and kind of establishing a stronger horizon line with some additional inks right here. I'm just using black. And what you'll find is I go back to black several times. It's just like I had to keep building up the ink more and more and more. I don't know why this paper or this scene really made me work for it. It's all kind of easy techniques, but just I wasn't getting the richness with the existing layering that I had on there. So I just built up more layers, and that's easy to do. You just kind of keep doing the same technique. You just apply more and more ink over the top of it, and that builds up to kind of a richer end result from the result of that. So, but here, one of the things to kind of observe right now is take a look at that horizon line and see what value it is right now, in terms of light and dark. It's probably about I don't know, maybe a 65-70% gray, 0 being just completely white and 100% being black. That's more like about a 70%, I would say. Okay, so that being said, I'm going in and adding some additional blue down. I wanted to have a really rich blue for this scene. I wanted it really... I don't know. I wanted that sky on this one to be kind of magical and really deep in terms of the kind of color depth, okay? Now, the dye-based inks are transparent, so when I talk about color depth, we can talk about having a nice range of visible values in there, but one of the things about dye-based inks is that they're transparent. So any colors that you apply onto your piece, and even if when you apply another color over the top of it, if it's not physically mixing with the colors underneath, which they do sometimes when it gets really built up, but when you layer color over color like that, transparent color over color, the colors underneath will affect what you can see on the surface, because they're not getting buried underneath another color. They're getting layered over, but it's still giving you they're still influencing what you can see. Okay, so you see that area in the sky where it's lighter? Okay, that kind of represents clouds or something like that, or just some moisture in the air that's being illuminated by sunlight, okay? But there's still a little bit of a warm glow to it, and that's from that antique linen that we laid down there. So that's been coated and layered over several times, okay? But now, excuse me, one of the things that you can see, do you see on that horizon line created by the Seaside Cove on the left and right hand side, it looks lighter, and it's because I'm kind of wiping off some of that black ink as I apply some more of this blue ink. Okay, so that was what I was talking about. Sometimes you have to kind of watch out. If you do your entire scene first with all of your imagery, and then if you go over it with a lot of ink, sometimes you lose a little bit of the crispness or even visible area of those impressions at times, okay? Now maybe if I used a different type of ink to stamp it out, maybe a StazOn or something like that, a solvent ink, something that wouldn't be potentially getting wiped off with these additional ink layers, then maybe not. I'm not sure. You just have to kind of play around with it and do some tests with your inks and whatever surface you're using, okay? And then a lot of times we use the inks and surfaces kind of in different ways too, with different touches and different techniques and I don't know, whatever you call it, like brush strokes almost. Instead of a brush, I'm using a paper towel here. But I don't know, I get there, and eventually it took quite a bit of ink here. So I'm applying, I think this is black here still. Okay, now I wanted a deeper blue tone, so one of the things that you'll see is when I go into my Prussian blue, it's like the paper is getting fairly saturated, so it's almost like I'm wiping off a lot of that black ink on there. And then I go back to black ink again just to kind of reestablish it along the way. So see, now look at that deep blue there. That's Prussian blue. It's a really deep dark blue from Marvy. And look at that. You can see where it's kind of really kind of dragging some of that black ink around, okay? Prussian blue is, I have a feeling that the consistency is thinner than other inks, so it's kind of moving things around and maybe putting some of the thicker inks back into solution. You can see where it's dragging like that. It almost looks like how alcohol inks look sometimes when you use like a blender on them, or just kind of when you paint them on like that. Okay, but that's kind of the blue that I'm going after, the richness right there. So all I do is I just go back to black later and I apply some of that right over the top of it too. I used a Caribbean blue on this too, and I don't know, I'm looking at it now, maybe I should have went back and added another layer of it, but see, I don't know, this Prussian blue did a pretty good job of building up some of that richer tone there. Now I'm going back to the black. Now look how black that looks, okay? See how much darker that and rich that looks there in the corner? So sometimes you just have to keep working it, and eventually you'll get to this, I don't know, kind of a result or level of saturation that you were going for, okay? And in this case, it was kind of extreme. Like I said, I'm not quite sure why that was the case with this one. All right, going for a pretty good and strong vignette. I really want to kind of darken my edges. I feel it kind of brings the viewer's attention to the center of the piece really well. And it closes it off in terms of kind of creating a enclosed statement. What you do is, it's what I was mentioning to the viewers of this stream, is that if you kind of approach your pieces, your cards, and it doesn't matter if it's a scene or if it's some other type of genre of stamping, you kind of approach it like a stage, okay? In that whatever you create within the area that you're working in, it creates a world unto itself, okay? And it means that you can do anything you want within that world, rather than seeing like a scene, like it's a piece of a greater overall, you know, like it's missing something, okay? When you create that strong vignette, it, you know, it makes a statement in itself. Okay, now one of the things I'm doing here is I'm applying some of the Tiny Rocks stamp in various tones. I still want to create the illusion that that area is being lit down there, so I'm doing some of the darker impressions of that Tiny Rock Small stamp around that lit area. And kind of in the center of the card, towards the bottom, I did lighter impressions of that rock, okay? So you can almost use that rock as kind of a toning device, okay? It's texture and, you know, it's an image, but when you use it in repetition like that, it can help you with your shading in many ways, okay? All right, so I was just talking about ways to color your scene, and here I grabbed some alcohol inks, and this is where you can go in and do more of your detailed style of shading, okay? So I utilize most of my lighter values of alcohol inks, and I'm just showing people there how light it is, okay? You can't really see too much of what I'm doing here because I'm just going with a very light value. And then what I do is I work incrementally a little bit darker, and alcohol pens are really great for that because they come in so many different values. Some of the colors are they're almost like a 5% version of whatever hue they are, like a 5% blue or something like that, and they have a 10% blue, 20%, etc. They're not very bright in those lighter values like that, but they're really perfect for shading and building up tone like that, okay? And one of the things I did was just on the darker areas of the imagery, such as under the spindrift or the crest of the wave like that, I've darkened it a little bit, but I didn't darken it too much. I just went kind of a little bit darker than what already existed down there, okay? That little pebbly area down below got a little bit busy, so I'm adding in some other tones down there to decrease the contrast between some of that texturing and those rocks, okay? Alright, palms with stalks, or palm stalks, I should say. I haven't used this stamp in quite a while. And here's what I was kind of going through in my head. I was wondering, okay, now I was going to do an island out there, but I thought, that might interfere with the shape of the palm stalks. Okay, the palm stalks will have these 3 stalks going upwards like that, flanking the seaside cove on the left and right side, and I thought, that island's going to kind of interfere with the gesture of the shape of these palm stalks, and I decided against the island in the background. If I weren't doing the palm stalks, I would definitely add the islands in the background to add a little bit of visual depth to the scene. Alright, now this page, it's not soaking wet or anything like that, but it is a little bit damp, so I hold that the palm stalk stamps down a little bit longer, thus allowing that ink to transfer a little bit longer. And I don't know, I didn't get as dark as an impression as I would have wanted to. Using like a VersaFine Clair would have given me a much darker impression, but this is glossy cardstock, which means I would have had to emboss these trees. And I thought about it, and I thought, I think I want to leave the embossing out of this one, so I just went with the dye-based ink impressions directly onto the scene. Alright, so one of the things that I'm doing here is I'm going to go in and add in some splatter painted applications of the Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White, which is a opaque white watercolor paint, and just using a old toothbrush, I'm splatter painting the scene, getting a nice varied application of little white dots onto the scene. And I get both kind of, I get different sizes of splatters sometimes. That's what I'm going for. Okay, and the Dr. Martin's dries pretty fast. It's a little bit busy up there with that, but I still have my palm fronds to add into the scene. Okay, let's see. I was going for some of my metallic pens here. There's the, I think these ones were the metallic. I'm trying to think if they were the glitter ones. There's both kind of the pearl metallic and neon glitter, I think they called it. Okay, so I'm applying these in here, but I'm applying this pen in an area where it's just about the same value as the pen, okay? So I didn't apply it in a lighter area where it would look like a darker star, but here I hold this up for the viewers of the live stream to see. When you hold it up at kind of an angle and it catches the light, it reflects light, so you get kind of like a hidden grouping of stars. Okay, so watch that little area in there. Okay, you can see it kind of twinkling there. See that right there? So it's kind of like hidden stars. So if someone was kind of holding your card that you gave to them, and they kind of turned it a little bit, you'd have these little twinkling stars revealing themselves. And here I'm using the green too, because it, you know, this color scheme is kind of blues and kind of that green, so I use some of those colors in there. And I have that red one there. I thought I was kind of joking around, but I don't know, not really, I guess. But it could be like Mars, you know, where Mars, when you look up at the night sky, if you're on a clear night, you know, there's sometimes you can see Mars, and it does have a little bit of reddish tinge even to the naked eye. All right, here comes my surfer, and you can see what the benefit of wiping off some of that ink behind the surfer on the seaside cove did. So you can see I get a nice crisp silhouette of that surfer there, and he's kind of like spotlit again because I have it in a lighter area, and also I wiped off that area of the seaside cove that I was going to stamp him in. You don't have to measure him off or anything like that, you know, I just kind of dabbed off a lot of that ink within, I don't know, maybe the space of like the size of a quarter or something like that. I almost took off too much, but it really doesn't matter in the end, you know, because you have that surfer kind of, you know, standing there anyway. All right, but here comes Mars. So a little bit of a red dot there. I don't know, it kind of breaks up the monotony of all that, you know, similar color scheme up there. Okay, so these are the palm fronds, and I'll do them in black. I was still kind of wondering about the possibility of doing some embossing on this card, and I would have done it on these fronds and some foliage that I use in the lower area, but I decided just to go straight forward with this and just stamp out these in black dye-based ink. Alright, so there's a left and right side, and what you do is you just kind of aim that curving frond where it's kind of coming from the stalk right there. But in the end, you kind of fill that area in anyway, so you don't have to aim it too carefully. But here comes the palm frond. Left, or is this the right one? I forget the name. I think this is right. Or no, there's a palm frond 1, 2, and 3, actually. So this one's called 3, and that other one kind of leaning from left to right is number 2. Okay, so we got the fronds there. So we get that nice kind of canopy up on upper area. But down below, where those fronds kind of go into the shadows, I mean, that looks okay as is, but I wanted to create, you know, some additional foliage down there. I think it makes the lower portion more interesting with these types of forms down here, and to kind of create something a little bit closer to the viewer's eye. The viewer is us, you know, looking at the piece. Or the viewers are us, okay? Or whoever, you know, you give your card to, all right? Okay, so this is the reeds down here. I don't always do that, but I really like that twisting, those twisting leaves in there with the reeds. I think it kind of adds a little bit of a, kind of a multiple shape pattern in that area. Most of the times I just use the reeds, but I don't know, those twisting leaves gives it a nice, I don't know, kind of a shape contrast in that area. All right, so closer things down there, it kind of gives your palm frond something to grow out of. A little bit of a stronger vignette with a little bit additional black ink on the perimeter, especially in the upper left and right and lower left and right corners like that. And see how it really kind of, everything in here is kind of framing off that lower section. And if you do put something in that lower section like that, it could be a surfer, or if the surfer wasn't in there, it could be a sailboat out on the water. You can have, I don't know, creature of the Black Lagoon coming out of the water if you wanted to, like that stamp that I showed earlier. Okay, so going in here with some additional textures. Okay, this is a 0.7 millimeter paint pen, white paint pen, and going in and adding some additional splashes. yeah, a little kind of twinkly light on the horizon or on the water surface like that. Kind of makes things look a little bit more dimensional. So if you shade an image, one of the things you can also do is you can also highlight it. And I'm just showing people that there are highlights everywhere. As you're watching this video, you know, there's highlights probably on your keyboard or on your, you know, tablet or phone, everywhere. You know, it doesn't matter what color it is, but you'll have some kind of illumination on it. You know, unless we were in kind of a completely, you know, dark room, absent of all light. But here on the palm stalks, facing the interior, on the palm stalks on the left, I highlight the right sides of those ones, and the palm stalks on the right side, I highlight them on the left side. So it's kind of like interior lighting, so it's like the lighting is coming from within and reflecting off of that ocean water. Okay, this is pigment ink right here, giving it a soft, kind of glowing light. Something I'd always recommend in just about any kind of application. Stamping can be, everything could be really crisp in stamping, okay? But from a textural standpoint, it's kind of limiting if you don't add in some kind of softer elements in there from a textural, stamping and textural standpoint. So having this in there really expands on your textural variety of your pieces. You can do this on anything. Even if you had it on, let's say, a word stamp or something that was stamped out in black, you can add a little of this on the top and it would look like your words are being top illuminated. You know, so it doesn't have to be a scene, but could be anything. Could be a birthday cake with candles on the top, and you can add in a little bit of a highlighting on the tops of, you know, some of those candles, and it would give them a glowing light instead of a, you know, a real super crisp one. Okay, so I'm adding in some additional crystals on this. I have a quote stamp that I'm going to be using on the back side of this card. And it's about stars. This is a condolence card that I'm making here for someone that had a son that used to love surfing. So I have a quote that's about stars, and so I wanted to add in these additional crystals, something to kind of add that little extra touch, and it makes it a little bit sparkly like that. Okay. And I just glued them down, so silently, one by one, in the infinite meadows. Okay, adding in some additional stars with my paint pen. And I have this I pre-formatted a half-page card with a little bit of a border around there so that I can just, during the live stream, go in and tape or glue this right down in there without people kind of waiting for me to cut that out. And here's the card formatting here. That's a half page with a little bit of white border around there like that. And that is the card there. So anyways, I hope you liked the card there and the whole kind of feel of it. I really enjoyed doing this one. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks as always for tuning into the Stampscapes channel.